The holographic headlines flickered across New Shanghai's skyline. Earth's last chance at the Stellar Games. Sarah Chen watched them from her underground training facility, her lips pressed into a thin line. The news feeds weren't wrong. After 15 years of humiliating defeats, the World Coalition was considering withdrawing from galactic competition entirely. The Stellar Games had begun as a peaceful alternative to interstellar warfare, but everyone knew the truth. They were a showcase of species supremacy, a way for the Galactic Alliance to establish hierarchies without open conflict. Humans ranked near the bottom, just above the methane-breathing Jovians, whose liquid bodies made them particularly unsuited for combat. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, her reflection in the polysteel walls showing a lean figure that would make most alien warriors laugh. At 32, she wasn't young by competition standards, and at 5'7", she was tiny compared to the towering champions of other worlds. But Sarah had something the previous Earth champions lacked. She had grown up studying their failures. Training simulation complete, announced the AI. Combat efficiency, 98.7%. Warning, recommended mass for Stellar Games qualification is 47% above current parameters. Sarah grabbed her towel, ignoring the AI's familiar warning. Display analysis of last sequence. The air filled with floating diagrams of her movements against the simulated Centaurian opponent. While previous Earth champions had tried to match alien strength with mechanical augmentation, Sarah's approach was different. She had spent years studying every species biology, every fighting style in the galaxy. But more importantly, she had studied their assumptions. The selection ceremony was tomorrow, and the Alliance representatives would be expecting another heavily augmented human warrior. The World Coalition, desperate for a victory, had constructed the most advanced combat suits in human history. They sat unused in their cases, while Sarah trained in nothing but standard impact mesh. Chen. The voice of Director Walsh echoed through the facility. The Coalition Board is here. Sarah turned to face the approaching group of officials, their faces a mixture of concern and resignation. Behind them loomed the massive form of Crix, the Proximan observer assigned to ensure Earth's selection process followed Alliance regulations. Ms. Chen, began Chairwoman Liu, her voice carefully diplomatic. We've reviewed your application for championship selection. While your combat scores are impressive, you fail to meet the basic physical requirements for what? Sarah interrupted, her voice calm. For dying gloriously like the last 15 champions. We've tried matching them strength for strength. It hasn't worked. Crix's translator crackled with amusement. The human speaks truth about dying, but proposition of victory without augmentation is. The universal translator struggled for a moment. Delusional. Sarah walked to the simulation controls. Director Walsh, would you authorize a live demonstration? Walsh glanced nervously at the Coalition Board before nodding. Sarah programmed the parameters and stepped into the training ring. Crix, your species holds 3 titles in the heavy combat division. Would you validate this simulation of your champion's fighting style? The Proximan's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he analyzed the holographic fighter that appeared. Accurate representation. But propose. Begin simulation. Sarah commanded. What followed left the room in stunned silence. Sarah moved like water against the holographic giant, never meeting strength with strength. Each massive strike found empty air while she exploited microsecond gaps in the fighter's defenses. When the simulation ended 3 minutes later, the projected champion lay defeated. Impossible. Crix rumbled. System malfunction. No malfunction, Walsh said quietly. I've seen her do this against every major fighting style in the database. She's been training since she was 12, specifically for the games. Chairwoman Liu stepped forward. The Alliance will never accept. They have to, Sarah interrupted. There's nothing in the regulations about minimum augmentation requirements. They built those rules assuming everyone would want to be stronger. Nobody considered that being weaker might be an advantage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans had spent 15 years trying to beat the aliens at their own game, never considering they might be playing the wrong game entirely. And if you face a real opponent, Crix challenged, holograms cannot break bones. Sarah smiled for the first time. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Every species in the games has evolved to fight opponents their own size or larger. Their joints, their reflexes, their fighting styles, all optimized for meeting force with force. She gestured to her slight frame, but nothing in their evolution prepared them for someone like me. Director Walsh cleared his throat. The selection ceremony is in 14 hours. If we're going to do this, we need the board's decision now. Chairwoman Liu looked at each board member in turn. Decades of humiliation weighed against this impossible strategy. Finally, she turned to Sarah. The Coalition has spent billions on combat augmentation research. You're asking us to send you into the games practically naked. I'm asking you to send them something they've never fought before, Sarah corrected. Every human champion has been a tragic hero, dying to prove we could match alien strength. She paused, letting her words sink in. I don't plan to be tragic, and I don't plan to die. I plan to win. The boardroom erupted in heated discussion, but Sarah had already turned back to her training. Tomorrow, she would either be Earth's champion or the end of humanity's participation in the games. But as she moved through her cool-down exercises, she smiled again. The aliens had spent centuries laughing at humanity's weakness. They hadn't realized that weakness, in the right hands, could be the deadliest strength of all. The Stellar Games training complex on Europa's orbit was a testament to alien engineering and alien arrogance. Sarah stood at the entrance to the main arena, watching competitors from across the galaxy demonstrate their prowess. A Drachnid warrior shattered a gravitational resistance field with pure force, while an Arcturus champion practiced precision strikes that broke the sound barrier. Human. The word cut through the air like an insult. Grax, the Syrian champion, towered over her at 12 feet tall. You mock these grounds with your presence. Sarah noted how his secondary arms twitched, a sign of agitation in his species. Every detail mattered. The arena will decide who belongs here, she replied, stepping past him into the training area. The next 6 weeks would determine everything. While the other champions focused on power training, Sarah had different plans. She pulled up her custom training regimen on her datapad, ignoring the whispers and laughs around her. Interesting approach. The voice belonged to Dr. Amal Hassan, Earth's assigned physician for the games. Though I'm concerned about your decision to train against the Class II combat drones, they're designed for augmented warriors. Sarah calibrated the drone's settings. That's exactly why I need them. Show me the medical data from our last champions. Amal projected a hologram showing 15 gruesome defeats. All of them died from catastrophic trauma. Even with augmentation, the human body simply couldn't. Look closer, Sarah interrupted. Every single champion died trying to block or absorb a direct hit. They fought like they were wearing augmented suits, because they were. She gestured to her simple training gear. I'm not going to fight like I'm wearing armor, because I'm not. The drone hummed to life, its massive frame casting a shadow over them. Sarah stepped into the ring as Amal retreated to a safe distance. Around the arena, other champions paused their training to watch what they assumed would be another human humiliation. The drone attacked with crushing force, but Sarah was already gone. Moving through space, the machine's targeting systems weren't designed to track. While other warriors trained to be unstoppable forces, she had trained to be an impossible target. Negligible impact force, one alien observer noted with disdain. The human cannot hope to damage. The drone crashed to the ground, its primary motor functions disabled. Sarah had exploited microscopic gaps in its joints, targeting neural circuits too small for larger warriors to effectively strike. She helped Amal collect the combat data as murmurs spread through the watching crowd. A trick, Grax declared. Combat drones are not living warriors. You cannot defeat flesh and bone with such methods. Sarah met his four-eyed gaze. Care to test that theory in a sparring match? The arena fell silent. Pre-game sparring matches were rare. Too much risk of injury, but they were allowed. Grax's facial ridges flushed with color, a sign of either excitement or rage. I will not be responsible for ending Earth's competition hopes before the games begin, he said, but there was a new note in his voice, uncertainty. Later that night, Sarah reviewed combat footage in her quarters while Amal treated her training injuries. The coalition is concerned, he said. They're receiving pressure from multiple species to withdraw your nomination. They say you're making a mockery of combat traditions. Good, Sarah replied, not looking up from the footage. Fear makes people stupid. Already they're changing how they train, trying to prepare for my style of fighting, which means they're training for a game I'm not going to play. And what game are you playing? Sarah finally looked up. The one humanity should have been playing all along. Every species out there evolved as an apex predator on their world. They're all built to win by dominating. She pulled up an image of Earth's history. But humans, we survived by adapting, by turning our weaknesses into strengths. While they're all trying to be better predators, I'm going to remind them what it means to face prey that learn to fight back. The next weeks became a psychological war. Sarah trained relentlessly, but never revealed her true capabilities. She let them see defeats in drone matches, only to adjust and win later. She studied each champion's reactions, their assumptions, their fears. The coalition's daily reports grew increasingly anxious. The alien media had turned her into a joke. The human who dared to enter the games without augmentation. Betting pools gave her the worst odds in games history. But Sarah saw something different in the champion's eyes. Doubt. They had trained all their lives to fight opponents like themselves. Now they faced something their training couldn't categorize. A warrior who turned their expectations into vulnerabilities. 2 days before the games, Sarah found a message in her quarters. The coalition had received one final offer, withdraw now, and Earth would be guaranteed a position in next year's games, with full access to Alliance augmentation technology. She sent back a single line. Humanity doesn't need better weapons. We just needed to remember what made us human in the first place. That night, as the training complex grew quiet, Sarah watched the stars through her viewport. Somewhere out there, Earth waited. A planet of beings the galaxy had dismissed as weak, unworthy of respect. They had spent generations trying to prove they could be just as strong as their alien neighbors. Sarah touched the viewport, her reflection overlaying the stars. Tomorrow, she would begin showing the galaxy that humanity had been strong all along, not despite their differences, but because of them. The aliens had evolved to be perfect predators. But they had forgotten that sometimes, the most dangerous thing in nature isn't the predator, it's the prey that learned to think. The opening ceremony of the Stellar Games filled Europa's orbital arena with a kaleidoscope of alien life. Sarah stood in the staging area, watching through monitors as champions paraded before the galactic elite. Every species had their heroes, giants of flesh and metal who embodied their civilization's might. Final chance to withdraw with dignity. The gravelly voice belonged to Xantu, the game's head coordinator. The Arcturian's crystalline skin refracted light as he studied her. Your presence here risks more than your life. It risks Earth's standing in the Alliance. Sarah continued her warm-up routine. Interesting. I don't recall you warning the other champions about dignity. The others are warriors. You are. He paused, translator struggling. An experiment. The first round matches flashed on the screen. Sarah's opponent would be Krell, the Jovian champion, a strategic choice by the committee, matching her against one of the few species humans had consistently outperformed. They wanted to give Earth a dignified exit in the first round. The arena roared as Sarah walked out. Unlike the other champions in their elaborate armor, she wore only the basic impact mesh required by regulations. The audience's reaction mixed confusion with derision. They had come expecting another doomed human warrior, encased in cybernetics. Instead, they got what appeared to be a baseline human in workout gear. Krell emerged from the opposite gate, his gelatinous form contained within an environmental suit. "This match dishonors us both," he burbled through his translator. "I have no desire to destroy one who comes so poorly prepared." Sarah settled into her starting position. "Then this should be interesting for both of us." The signal rang. Krell launched forward, his suit's hydraulics allowing his fluid form to strike with tremendous force. The audience leaned forward, expecting to witness the shortest match in game's history. Instead, they saw empty space where Sarah had been standing. She moved like Mercury, each of Krell's strikes meeting nothing but air. The Jovian's environmental suit, designed for power and protection, couldn't match her mobility. "Stand and fight." Krell's frustration made his translator crackle. "I am fighting," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite her constant motion. "You're just not seeing it yet." The match continued for 10 minutes, an eternity in championship combat. Krell's movements grew increasingly erratic as his suit's power reserves depleted. The audience's mocking laughter had died, replaced by confused murmurs. Sarah had yet to launch a single attack. "What game is this?" Krell demanded, his gelatinous form rippling with agitation. "You make mockery of combat." "No," Sarah answered. "I'm making you think." In the next instant, she finally struck, not at Krell, but at a specific joint in his environmental suit. The seal cracked precisely, releasing a burst of pressure that sent the Jovian champion rolling out of bounds. The arena fell silent. According to game's rules, any competitor forced out of the combat zone was eliminated. Sarah had won without ever directly engaging her opponent. The post-match analysis sparked furious debate. Some called it cowardice, others called it cheating. But no one could cite a single rule violation. Sarah had simply fought in a way no one had considered possible. Her second match came against Tilara, the Venusian champion. The Serpentine warrior was famous for her speed, having won multiple titles in lightweight combat. The committee clearly hoped to force Sarah into direct engagement. Instead, they watched as Sarah turned Kilara's speed against her. Every strike the Venusian launched carried momentum that Sarah redirected, letting physics do what strength couldn't. The match ended with Tilara unconscious, her own kinetic energy used to defeat her. By the third match, the atmosphere in the arena had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by something more dangerous. Fear. Sarah faced Drax, the Martian champion, a warrior whose exoskeleton could shrug off artillery fire. "You cannot dodge forever," Drax clicked as they squared off. "Eventually, you must strike. And when you do..." "That's your first mistake," Sarah interrupted. "Assuming I think like you do." The match that followed redefined combat in the games. Sarah didn't avoid Drax's attacks. She lived inside them, moving through gaps in his defenses that his species had never needed to protect. She struck at neural clusters too small for traditional warriors to target, using knowledge of xenobiology that Earth had gathered over decades of diplomatic relations. Drax fell, his impenetrable armor useless against an opponent who never tried to penetrate it. In the medical bay afterward, Dr. Hassan reviewed Sarah's biometrics. "The committee is in chaos," he reported. 3 victories, and you've yet to land what they consider a legitimate strike." Sarah stretched, working out the tension from the matches. "They're starting to understand. Look at the audience reactions." The holographic replays showed the changing expressions of alien spectators. Gone was the dismissive superiority, replaced by growing comprehension. Some had begun to notice how Sarah's style reflected humanity's history, a species that survived not by overwhelming its opponents, but by understanding them. "The quarterfinals will be different," Amal warned. "They'll adapt their strategies." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm counting on. They'll try to fight like me now, but they can't. Their bodies, their instincts, their entire evolution works against it. They're trapped by their own strength." That night, as Sarah prepared for the quarterfinals, she received another message from the coalition. But this time, It wasn't a plea to withdraw. It was data showing how applications to Earth's combat academies had skyrocketed. Humans across the galaxy were starting to realize that their perceived weaknesses might be their greatest assets. Sarah saved the message, thinking of all the future human champions who would enter these games. They wouldn't come trying to be stronger than their opponents. They would come as humans, adaptable, innovative, and impossible to predict. The aliens had spent centuries evolving to be perfect warriors. But they were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who hits hardest. It's the one who rewrites the rules of the game itself. The quarterfinal victory had come at a cost. Sarah lay on the medical bay's examination table as Dr. Hassan studied the holographic display of her injuries. Her match against the Centaurian champion had pushed her strategy to its limits. 3 cracked ribs, microfractures in your left arm, and severe muscle strain, Amal listed grimly. The Centaurian's sonic attack may have also damaged your inner ear. Traditional medical protocol would disqualify you from continuing. Sarah watched the replay of the match. The Centaurian had been clever, using area effect attacks that couldn't be completely dodged. Can you get me ready for the semifinals? Sarah. Amal hesitated. The next match is against Grax. The Syrian hasn't lost a single match in 3 games. His neurotoxin glands alone have killed 6 champions. You didn't answer my question. The doctor sighed, adjusting the regeneration field around her ribs. Yes, but you'll be at 60% capacity at best. And there's something else. He lowered his voice. I've detected unusual energy signatures in the arena during your last match. The kind produced by illegal combat enhancers. Sarah absorbed this information silently. The games committee was getting desperate. Her success threatened more than just their combat traditions. It threatened the very hierarchy the games had been designed to maintain. Your medical data from the quarterfinals has been leaked, Amal continued. Every competitor now knows exactly where you're hurt. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking. The aliens would expect her to withdraw, to preserve humanity's dignity in the face of certain defeat. Just like they'd expected her to lose every previous match. Help me up, she said finally. I need to modify my training routine. The next 12 hours transformed the training area into a laboratory of human adaptation. While other champions practiced their killing strikes, Sarah worked with Amal to redesign her entire fighting style around her injuries. The human still trains, a voice observed. Sarah turned to find Xantu watching her. Though perhaps trains is the wrong word. You seem to be evolving. Isn't that what these games are about? Sarah asked, noting how the coordinator's crystalline fingers tapped against his leg, a sign of agitation in his species. Evolution. The games exist to showcase strength, Xantu corrected, to establish natural order. No, Sarah countered, continuing her modified exercises. They exist because the Alliance fears war. You created the games to let species prove their dominance without destroying each other. She met his faceted eyes. But you never considered that combat itself might evolve. The coordinator left without responding, but Sarah had seen the concern in his crystalline patterns. The next day, as she prepared for the semifinal match, the arena was packed beyond capacity. News of her injuries had spread, and the audience had come expecting to see humanity's innovative strategy finally fail against overwhelming force. Grax entered the arena first, his massive form drawing roars of approval. The Syrian champion had modified his own fighting style, incorporating elements designed to counter Sarah's evasive tactics. When Sarah emerged, the crowd fell into confused silence. She moved differently now, her injuries visible in her gait. But there was something else, something in her posture that made the more experienced warriors in the audience lean forward with sudden attention. You should not have come, Grax rumbled as they faced each other. Your wounds dishonor us both. Sarah's response was quiet, but carried through the arena. That's the difference between us, Grax. You see wounds. I see data. The match signal sounded. What followed would be studied in combat schools across the galaxy for generations. Sarah didn't fight against her injuries. She fought through them, turning each limitation into a new variable in her strategy. When her left side proved too weak for certain movements, she created new ones. When her balance suffered from the inner ear damage, she used the disorientation to move in ways that defied prediction. Grax found himself fighting a competitor who seemed to transform with each exchange. Every time he adapted to her limitations, she turned those very limitations into advantages. The Syrian's frustration grew. His neurotoxin glands activated, filling the air with deadly compounds. But Sarah had anticipated this, her breathing precisely controlled. She had trained herself to fight while taking only the smallest necessary breaths, turning even the need for oxygen into a calculated resource. The match stretched on, becoming the longest semifinal in game's history. The audience watched in growing amazement as the injured human champion not only survived, but began to control the pace of combat. Grax's superior strength meant nothing when he couldn't land a solid strike, and his stamina began to wane. But it was what happened next that truly shocked the arena. Sarah had maneuvered Grax into position for what seemed like a predictable exchange. The Syrian champion moved to counter, and walked straight into a trap. Sarah didn't strike with force. Instead, she used a complex series of nerve strikes that she shouldn't have known about, targeting weaknesses in Syrian physiology that were supposed to be classified information. Grax collapsed, his massive body paralyzed by his own nervous system. The arena erupted in chaos. Medical teams rushed to revive the Syrian champion, while Games officials huddled in emergency conference. Sarah stood calmly in the center of the storm, her breathing measured despite her injuries. Hours later, in a private meeting room, Sarah faced the Games committee. They had found no rules violations, but their accusations were clear. "How did you know about the Syrian neural vulnerabilities?" Kekshan, too, demanded. "That information is protected by Alliance security protocols." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The same way I knew about the illegal combat enhancers in the arena. The same way I knew about the leaked medical data." She paused. "Humans have spent generations being underestimated by the Alliance. Did you really think we weren't watching? Learning? Adapting?" The committee had no response. They couldn't disqualify her without admitting their own violations of Games protocols. More importantly, they couldn't erase what the galaxy had witnessed, a new kind of warrior, one who turned weakness into strength and injury into opportunity. As Sarah left the meeting, Dr. Hassan waited with updated medical reports. "The finals are in 15 hours, he said. "Your opponent will be—" "I know who it is," Sarah interrupted. "The defending champion. The one they said no human could ever hope to face." She smiled, though it made her injured ribs ache. "Tell me, doctor, do you know why humans are the only species that tells stories about defending the weak against the strong?" Amal shook his head. "Because deep down, we've always known that being strong isn't about having power." Sarah started walking toward the medical bay, ready to prepare for the greatest challenge of her life. It's about knowing what to do when you don't have it. The final match of the Stellar Games arrived with unprecedented tension. The defending champion, Kithraxis of the Alpha Draconian Empire, had ruled the Games for 3 cycles. 9 feet of evolved perfection, with regenerative capabilities and strength that could crush battleship armor. Sarah watched the champion's warm-up routine from her preparation chamber. Kithraxis moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator, each motion a reminder of why the Draconians stood at the peak of galactic hierarchy. "The betting pools have shifted," Dr. Hassan reported, making final adjustments to Sarah's impact mesh. "You're no longer considered the longest odds in Games history. Now I'm just second longest." Sarah smiled, though her eyes never left the monitor. "The networks are calling this Apex versus adaptation. The entire galaxy is watching." Amal paused. "The Coalition reports that whatever happens today, humanity's application for full Alliance membership will be reviewed." Sarah finally turned from the screen. That was never what this was about. Then what? Humanity spent generations trying to prove we deserved respect. Sarah interrupted, starting her final stretches. We never realized that by trying to prove it, we were accepting their definition of what made someone worthy of respect. The arena fell silent as both champions entered. The contrast was striking. Kithraxis in gleaming bioorganic armor that moved like a second skin, Sarah in her simple impact mesh, still showing signs of injury from previous matches. I have studied your matches, Kithraxis rumbled, vocal chambers creating subsonic frequencies that made the arena tremble. You have impressed many. But impression is not victory. Sarah settled into her starting stance, one developed over thousands of hours of training against every known fighting style in the galaxy. You're right. Victory isn't about impressing anyone. It's about understanding. The match signal sounded. Thraxis moved with devastating speed, but Sarah was already gone, flowing through space like water through stone. The champion's attacks, powerful enough to shatter reinforced alloys, found nothing but empty air. But this time was different. The champion had indeed studied Sarah's matches, had adapted strategies to counter her evasive style. Each attack was designed not to hit, but to control space, to limit options. The first real contact came 5 minutes in, a glancing blow that sent Sarah spinning. The crowd roared, expecting the beginning of the end. Instead, they saw something new. Sarah turned the spin into movement, using the force of the impact to accelerate in an impossible direction. You cannot win by avoiding combat forever, Kithraxis growled, pressing the advantage. I'm not avoiding combat, Sarah replied, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. I'm redefining it. The match transformed into something beyond traditional combat. Kithraxis possessed overwhelming power, regenerative abilities, and centuries of combat experience. But Sarah had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, turning humanity's perceived weaknesses into a completely new way of fighting. She moved through gaps in the champion's defenses that shouldn't have existed, exploiting microsecond vulnerabilities that other species had never needed to protect. Each time Thraxis adapted, Sarah changed her entire approach, fighting like water changing its shape to flow through any obstacle. Minutes stretched into an hour, the longest championship match in game's history. Kithraxis' regenerative abilities meant the champion couldn't tire, but they also made the Draconian overconfident, willing to take risks that a more vulnerable fighter would avoid. Sarah had counted on this. The decisive moment came in a sequence that would be studied for centuries. Kithraxis launched a combination designed to force Sarah into a vulnerable position. Instead, she moved into the attack, closer than any opponent had ever dared. Now you die, Kithraxis snarled, certain of victory. Sarah's voice was calm. No, now you learn. What followed was not a single strike, but a cascade of precisely calculated movements. Each one targeted a different aspect of draconian biology, pressure points that disrupted regenerative processes, neural clusters that controlled autonomous responses, microscopic weak points in supposedly impenetrable scales. Kithraxis, the undefeated champion of the stellar games, collapsed. The arena erupted in chaos. Medical teams rushed to the fallen champion, while officials frantically reviewed the match recordings. They found no illegal strikes, no prohibited techniques. Just a perfect understanding of draconian biology, combined with a fighting style that had never existed before. Hours later, after the medical teams had revived Kithraxis and confirmed no lasting damage, Sarah stood before the Games Committee one final time. The championship crown, designed for beings twice her size, was almost comical on her head. You have changed things. Can't, Tutu said quietly. Perhaps too much. No, Sarah corrected. I just reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each committee member. Strength isn't about being the most powerful. It's about understanding power itself. In the days that followed, as Sarah prepared to return to Earth, The galaxy buzzed with the implications of her victory. Combat schools across Alliance space began incorporating human techniques into their training. More importantly, species that had been dismissed as too weak for serious competition began developing their own unique approaches to combat. The games would never be the same. But then, that had been the point all along. On her final night on Europa, Sarah visited the training area one last time. She found Cathraxis there, already preparing for the next games. "You have given me a gift," the former champion said without turning, though it took time to understand it. "What gift is that?" "The understanding that perfection is not about being unstoppable." Cathraxis turned to face her. "It is about being unlimited in how you can change." Sarah smiled. That's the thing about evolution. The most successful species isn't always the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes it's just the one most willing to try something new. As she walked away, leaving the former champion to train, Sarah thought about all the future human champions who would enter these games. They wouldn't come trying to prove they were strong enough to compete. They would come knowing that humanity's greatest strength had never been about power. It had always been about the willingness to change, to adapt, to turn apparent weakness into unprecedented strength. The galaxy had spent centuries laughing at humanity's limitations. They never realized that limitations were just the beginning of evolution.